The last thing Juliana Grace expected when she walked into the grand ballroom that Saturday evening was to feel completely out of place at a charity gala she helped organize. But there she was, standing near the entrance in a borrowed emerald dress, watching women drape themselves in diamonds that probably cost more than her annual salary as an elementary school teacher. She'd volunteered to coordinate the children's literacy auction items, spent weeks gathering donations, and somehow that landed her a seat at the event itself. Her principal had insisted, "You worked harder than anyone, Julie. You deserve to be there." Now she wasn't so sure. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and silk-draped tables, each centerpiece an elaborate arrangement of white roses and gold-dusted branches. Juliana clutched her small clutch purse and made her way toward the seating chart, scanning for table 17. She wove through clusters of elegantly dressed guests, their laughter polished, and their conversations peppered with mentions of vacation homes and yacht clubs. Her heels, also borrowed from her roommate, pinched her toes with every step. Table 17 sat near the middle of the room, already half filled with guests. Juliana found her name card between two empty seats and settled into the chair on the right, smoothing her dress beneath her. An older couple across from her nodded politely, before returning to their conversation about a recent trip to the French Riviera. A woman in red satin to her left was absorbed in her phone, typing furiously with manicured nails. Juliana reached for her water glass, taking a long sip and trying to remember why she'd agreed to come. The literacy program. Right. The auction would fund books for underprivileged schools across the city, including hers. She taught second grade in a neighborhood where most kids shared outdated textbooks and the library hadn't seen a new book in 5 years. This mattered. She just had to get through dinner. "Is this seat taken?" The voice came from her right, low and quiet. Juliana turned to find a man standing beside the empty chair, one hand resting on its back. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair that looked like he'd run his fingers through it once and called it styled. His tuxedo fit him perfectly, but unlike the other men in the room who wore their formal wear like armor, he seemed almost uncomfortable in it. His tie was slightly loosened at the collar. "No, please," Juliana said, gesturing to the seat. "It's all yours." He sat down with an economy of movement, not making eye contact with anyone else at the table. Interesting. Most people at these events seemed to know everyone, air kissing and name dropping from the moment they arrived. This man settled into his chair like he was trying to take up as little space as possible. "I'm Juliana," she offered, extending her hand. "My friends call me Julie." He glanced at her, and she noticed his eyes were gray, the color of a winter sky before snow. His handshake was firm but brief. Grant Owens. "First time at one of these?" Juliana asked, recognizing a fellow fish out of water. "You could say that." A slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You?" "Same. I helped organize the literacy auction, so I got roped into attending. I teach second grade over at Riverside Elementary." Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of interest. "That's on the east side, right? Near the manufacturing district." "That's the one." "You know it." "I know the area," Grant said, his tone careful. He reached for his own water glass, and Juliana noticed his hands. They weren't the soft, manicured hands of the businessmen she'd seen tonight. His fingers were long and capable looking, with a thin scar across his right knuckle. Working hands, her grandmother would have called them. Before she could ask more, a woman in a glittering silver gown approached the microphone on stage, welcoming everyone and explaining the evening schedule. Dinner, speeches, then the auction. Juliana tried to focus, but she found herself aware of Grant beside her. He sat very still, his attention on the stage, but his shoulders were tense. When the servers began bringing out the first course, he barely touched his food. "Not hungry," Juliana whispered as the woman at the podium continued talking about the Foundation's mission. Grant looked down at his plate, a delicate arrangement of seared scallops and microgreens. Not used to food this fancy, I guess. That surprised her. His tuxedo, while understated, was clearly expensive, but his discomfort seemed genuine. "Same," she admitted. "I'm more of a pizza and Chinese takeout person." His smile reached his eyes this time. "Now you're speaking my language." The ice broken, they fell into easy conversation between courses. Grant asked about her teaching, and Juliana found herself telling him stories about her students. 7-year-old Marcus, who'd recently discovered he loved reading after she'd found him a book about dinosaurs. Sophia, who wrote elaborate stories about a magical cat, but struggled with spelling. Grant listened with what seemed like genuine interest, asking questions that showed he was actually paying attention. "What about you?" Juliana asked as servers cleared their salad plates. "What do you do?" Grant hesitated, his fingers drumming once against the tablecloth. "I work in manufacturing." "Factory operations, mostly." "Really? What kind of manufacturing?" "Automotive parts. Nothing glamorous." He shifted in his seat. "What made you want to teach?" The deflection was smooth, but Juliana caught it. He didn't want to talk about work. Fair enough. Plenty of people kept their professional lives private. "My second-grade teacher, Mrs. Chen. I had a rough home life, parents going through a messy divorce. She made her classroom feel safe, like no matter what happened at home, I had this place where I belonged." "I wanted to be that for other kids." Grant's expression softened. "That's a good reason. What about you? How'd you end up in manufacturing?" "Started from the bottom, worked my way up." His gray eyes met hers. "Sometimes the best way to understand something is to learn every part of it." There was a story there, Juliana sensed, but before she could probe further, the main course arrived. Filet mignon with roasted vegetables and a red wine reduction. The conversation at their table picked up as people compared notes on the food, and Juliana found herself genuinely enjoying Grant's quiet commentary. He had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, making observations about the overly elaborate menu descriptions that had her stifling laughter. "I'm pretty sure that's just mashed potatoes," he murmured, nodding toward a neighboring table's dish described as truffle-infused potato puree with butter emulsion. Juliana pressed her napkin to her mouth, trying not to laugh out loud. "Stop. I'm going to make a scene." "Would that be worse than the guy at table 4 who's been talking about his golf handicap for 20 minutes? She glanced over. Sure enough, a red-faced man was gesturing animatedly while his table-mates looked progressively more glazed. "Okay, you have a point." The meal continued, and Juliana realized she hadn't checked her phone once. Usually at social events, she was counting down the minutes until she could politely leave. But talking with Grant felt natural, effortless. He wasn't trying to impress her with big words or name-dropping. He just listened when she talked and responded with thoughtful questions. When dinner ended and the auction began, Juliana sat up straighter, watching as her carefully curated items went up for bidding. A signed collection of children's classics went for $1,500. An author visit to a school of the winner's choice brought in $2,000. Each successful bid made her heart soar. This money would buy books, fund reading programs, give kids like hers a chance. "You did a good job," Grant said quietly, leaning toward her. "These are smart auction items." "Thanks. I wanted things that would actually help kids, not just sound good on paper." He nodded, his eyes still on the stage. When a complete classroom library set came up, 5,000 books organized by reading level. The bidding started at $10,000. Juliana held her breath. This was the crown jewel of her auction items, the thing that could truly transform a school's literacy program. The bidding climbed. 15,000, 20,000. She gripped the edge of the table. 30,000. A woman in the front row called out. Silence fell. 30,000 was a fortune. Juliana's heart hammered. If this sold, they'd exceed their fundraising goal by 50,000, Grant said, his voice calm and clear. Every head at the table swiveled toward him. Juliana's jaw dropped. Grant, $50,000 from the gentleman at table 17, the auctioneer said, her voice bright with excitement. Do I hear 55? The ballroom went quiet. The woman in the front row shook her head. No one else raised a paddle. Sold. For $50,000 to Grant Owens at table 17. Applause erupted through the room. Juliana stared at Grant, her mind reeling. $50,000. He just bid $50,000 like it was nothing. Like he was buying a coffee, not funding an entire literacy program. Grant, she managed when the applause died down and the auction moved to the next item. That's an incredible amount of money. He looked uncomfortable, his shoulders hunching slightly. It's for a good cause. You said your school needs books. My school. You're donating this to Riverside. Where else would it go? His gray eyes met hers. You're the one who knows what kids need. Juliana felt tears prick her eyes. $50,000 worth of books. Her students would have access to current, diverse, engaging reading material. Marcus could explore every dinosaur book in existence. Sophia could find stories with characters who looked like her. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Grant shifted in his seat. Just make sure the books get to kids who need them. But Juliana couldn't let it go. $50,000 wasn't casual money, not even for someone who seemed comfortable at a charity gala. She'd assumed Grant was like her, someone who'd ended up with a ticket through work or volunteering. But you didn't drop that kind of cash unless you had significantly more where that came from. She studied him with new eyes. The tuxedo that fit too perfectly to be rented. The quiet confidence that she'd mistaken for discomfort. The way he deflected questions about his work. Oh God. Who was Grant Owens? Excuse me a moment, she whispered, pulling out her phone and ducking under the table slightly. She opened her browser and typed his name. Grant Owens Manufacturing Automotive. The results loaded and Juliana's stomach dropped. Grant Owens, founder and CEO of Owens Industrial Solutions, one of the largest automotive parts manufacturers in the country. Net worth estimated at $300 million. Recently named one of Forbes' most innovative manufacturers under 40. She looked at the photos. It was definitely him, though in the professional shots his tie was properly knotted and his hair was neater. But those gray eyes were unmistakable. Juliana sat up slowly, her mind racing. He wasn't just comfortable at this gala. He was probably one of the biggest donors. He could probably buy the entire hotel where they were sitting. And he'd spent the last 2 hours listening to her talk about her classroom like he was a normal person, like he wanted to know her. The auction continued, but Juliana barely heard it. She was hyper-aware of Grant beside her, this man who apparently had more money than she could conceptualize, who'd let her ramble about pizza toppings and second graders without once mentioning he was a CEO. Part of her felt foolish. Had he been laughing at her internally? Amused by the elementary school teacher who thought they were both out of place, but when she glanced at him, he wasn't watching the auction. He was looking at her, concern creasing his forehead. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "I looked you up," she blurted, then immediately wished she could take it back. "Smooth, Julie, real smooth." Grant went very still. Ah, you're Grant Owens. The Grant Owens. I'm just Grant. His voice was measured. Same person I was 5 minutes ago. You're a CEO, you're worth. She couldn't even say it. Does that matter? The question wasn't defensive. He genuinely seemed to want to know, did it? Juliana looked at him, this man who'd made her laugh, who'd listened to her stories about 7-year-olds, who just donated $50,000 to make sure kids had books. I don't know, she said honestly. I've never met anyone like you before. I'm not that interesting. Grant's mouth quirked. I just make car parts. You don't just anything. Juliana gestured around the ballroom. Everyone here probably knows who you are except me. That's actually why I like talking to you. The admission seemed to cost him something. You treated me like a regular person. Do you know how rare that is? The auction ended, and music began playing as people moved from their tables toward the bar and mingling areas. Grant didn't move, and neither did Juliana. They sat in their bubble at table 17 while the gala swirled around them. I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable, Grant said. I should have been upfront about who I was. No, I'm sorry for being weird about it. Juliana took a breath. It just surprised me. You don't act like. Like what? Like someone who has that much money. You seem so normal. He actually laughed at that, a genuine sound that transformed his face. I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment with my mom and 2 brothers. We ate pasta 5 nights a week because it was cheap. Trust me, I am normal. I just happen to have a business that did well. Did well is an understatement. Okay, did really well. Grant stood, offering his hand. Would you like to get out of here? Maybe go somewhere that doesn't require formal wear? Juliana stared at his outstretched hand. This was crazy. She just met him. He was a millionaire, CEO, someone who existed in a completely different world. But when she looked at his face, she saw the same quiet man who'd made her laugh about mashed potatoes. The man who'd listened to her teaching stories like they mattered. She took his hand. I know a great Chinese takeout place. They left the gala together, Grant's hand warm against the small of her back as they navigated through the crowd. Juliana caught stares, whispers. People were noticing Grant Owens leaving early with an unknown woman. She should probably care about that, but she was too focused on the fact that he'd chosen to leave with her at all. Outside, the night air was cool and refreshing after the stuffy ballroom. Grant loosened his tie completely, pulling it off and stuffing it in his pocket. That's better. Not a fan of formal events. Hate them, he admitted. But the foundation does good work, so I try to show up, make an appearance, write a check, leave early. You don't usually stay for the whole dinner. No, he looked at her, something vulnerable in his expression. I usually don't have a reason to stay. Oh, Juliana's heart did a complicated flip in her chest. The Chinese place is about 10 blocks from here. We could walk if these shoes don't kill me first. Grant glanced down at her heels, then back up with a small smile. I drove. Cars in the garage. Of course he drove. Probably something expensive and sleek. Juliana prepared herself for a Ferrari or Lamborghini, some ostentatious display of wealth. So when Grant led her to a 3-year-old Honda Accord, she actually stopped walking. What? He asked, noticing her expression. This is your car. It's reliable and gets good gas mileage. Grant clicked the key fob and the locks opened. What were you expecting? Honestly, something with your company's parts in it at minimum. He laughed again, and Juliana realized she liked the sound. I have a classic Mustang I restore in my garage. That has plenty of my parts. But for everyday driving, he patted the Honda's roof. This does the job. Juliana slid into the passenger seat, her borrowed dress bunching around her knees. The car was clean but lived in. A travel coffee mug sat in the cup holder. A book on lean manufacturing principles rested on the back seat. This was a car that got used, not a showpiece. Grant started the engine and pulled out of the parking garage. "Where am I going?" "Head east on 5th Street. It's a little place called Golden Dragon. Nothing fancy, but the owner makes the best lo mein in the city." They drove through downtown, the lights of the city blurring past. Grant was a careful driver, using his turn signals and checking his mirrors. Juliana found herself relaxing into the seat, watching him. His profile was strong in the dashboard light, all angles and shadows. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "Why didn't you tell me who you were? At dinner, I mean." Grant was quiet for a moment, his hands steady on the wheel. "Because the second people know, everything changes. They either want something from me, or they get intimidated, or they start acting fake. You were just yourself. It was nice." "I was nervous as hell," Juliana admitted. "I felt completely out of place." "Me too. But you're Grant Owens. You probably get invited to those things all the time." "Doesn't mean I fit in." He glanced at her. "Money doesn't make you belong, Julie. Sometimes it does the opposite." There was a loneliness in his voice that made her chest ache. She thought about what it must be like, being surrounded by people who wanted your money or your influence, never sure if anyone just wanted you. "Turn left at the next light," she directed. "It's the blue building mid-block." Golden Dragon was exactly as promised. A small restaurant with plastic tablecloths, and a menu written in both English and Chinese characters on the wall. At 9:30 on a Saturday night, it was nearly empty except for an elderly couple in the corner and a delivery driver picking up an order. Mrs. Chen, the owner, greeted Juliana with a warm smile. "Julie, haven't seen you in 2 weeks. Where you been?" "Busy with work, Mrs. Chen. This is my friend Grant." Mrs. Chen's shrewd eyes assessed Grant, and Juliana could see her making calculations. "Friend, huh? You two sit anywhere. I bring you the good stuff." They settled into a booth, and Grant looked around with genuine interest. "You're a regular here. Since I moved to the city 5 years ago, Mrs. Chen feeds me when I'm too tired to cook." Juliana smiled. "Fair warning, she's going to bring us enough food for 6 people. I'm not complaining." Mrs. Chen appeared with tea and a knowing look. "I bring lo mein, orange chicken, spring rolls, and beef with broccoli. You both too skinny." After she disappeared into the kitchen, Juliana poured tea for both of them. "So, Grant Owens, tell me your story. How does someone go from eating pasta 5 nights a week to running a $300 million company?" Grant wrapped his hands around the small teacup. "The short version. I was good at fixing things. Used to take apart engines in my mom's garage, figure out how they worked, put them back together. Got a job at a parts factory when I was 18, worked the line. Noticed inefficiencies, ways to make things better. Worked my way up to floor manager, then operations. Then I had some ideas the company didn't want to pursue. So you started your own company." "Took out every loan I could, maxed out credit cards, nearly gave my mother a heart attack. Built a small operation in a warehouse, just me and 5 employees. We made one specific part better than anyone else was making it. Word spread," he shrugged. 15 years later, here we are. That's the short version. You want the long version, we'll need more tea." Mrs. Chen arrived with plates of steaming food, covering their table until there was barely room for their cups. "Eat," she commanded. "Both of you." Juliana reached for the lo mein with her chopsticks, and Grant followed suit. For several minutes they ate in comfortable silence. The food was as good as promised, savory and hot. "Okay," Juliana said around a bite of orange chicken. "Now you tell me about you. I shared my whole life story at dinner. What do you want to know?" "Everything. Start with why you're single." The question slipped out before she could stop it. Grant raised an eyebrow. "What makes you think I'm single? You're at a charity gala alone, and you left with me for Chinese food instead of going home to someone. Pretty good indicators." Fair point. Grant set down his chopsticks. I was engaged once, 5 years ago. She liked the idea of dating a successful entrepreneur, but when the company hit a rough patch and I was working 80-hour weeks, living at the factory to solve production problems, she decided she didn't sign up for that. Called off the wedding 6 weeks before the date. Grant, I'm sorry. Don't be. She was right. She signed up for dinners at nice restaurants and vacation homes. I was offering factory floors and supply chain spreadsheets. We wanted different things. He picked up his tea. Haven't really dated much since. Hard to know if someone wants you or your bank account. Juliana understood better now. The quiet demeanor, the hesitation to reveal who he was. He'd been hurt, and he'd built walls to protect himself. For what it's worth, I'm terrible at relationships too. My last boyfriend got mad that I spent too much time worrying about my students. Said I was more invested in my classroom than in him. Were you, honestly? Yeah, he wanted me to skip parent-teacher conferences to go to his company happy hours. My kids needed me more than he needed a +1. Grant's smile was approving. You made the right choice. They continued eating and talking, the conversation flowing easily between childhood stories and life philosophies. Juliana learned Grant had 2 younger brothers he helped put through college, that his mother still lived in the same 2-bedroom apartment because she liked her neighbors, that he spent most weekends restoring his Mustang and avoiding social events. In turn, she told him about growing up in a small town, about her parents who'd eventually found their way back to friendship after their divorce, about her college roommate Sarah, who was still her best friend and current roommate, about the student who'd hugged her last week and said she was his favorite person in the world and how that was worth more than any salary. You really love teaching, Grant observed. I really do. Even on the hard days when kids are melting down and the copier breaks and I find glue in places glue should never be, she grinned. It matters, you know, being there for them. Like Mrs. Chen was there for you. Exactly, Mrs. Chen reappeared to refill their tea and pack up the considerable leftovers. You come back soon, she told Grant. Anyone who makes our Julie smile like that is always welcome. Outside the restaurant, the night had grown cooler. Juliana shivered slightly in her thin dress, and Grant immediately shrugged off his tuxedo jacket, draping it over her shoulders. It smelled like him, something clean and cedar-like. Thank you, she said softly. They stood on the sidewalk, and Juliana realized she didn't want the night to end. It was past 11, and she had papers to grade tomorrow, but walking away from Grant felt wrong, like closing a door before seeing what was inside. I should drive you home, Grant said, but he didn't move toward the car. You should, Juliana agreed, not moving either. Julie. Her name sounded different in his voice, careful and warm at once. Can I see you again? Not at a gala, just us, her heart hammered. Yes. Tomorrow, I know it's soon, but tomorrow's perfect. I mean, I have to grade papers in the morning, but after that. 2 o'clock. I could pick you up. Juliana gave him her address, and he typed it into his phone. Then he drove her home, the car quiet except for the radio playing softly. When he pulled up outside her apartment building, he walked her to the door. Tonight was the best time I've had in years, Grant said, his hands in his pockets. Thank you for the Chinese food. Thank you for the $50,000 book donation. Juliana looked up at him. My students are going to have so many opportunities because of you. Because of us. You're the one who put the auction together. They stood close, the space between them charged with possibility. Grant reached out slowly, giving her time to step back, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her jaw. See you tomorrow, Julie, he said quietly. Tomorrow, she echoed. She watched him drive away, then floated up to her apartment. Sarah was still awake, curled on the couch with a book. How was the gala? Sarah asked, then stopped when she saw Juliana's face. "Oh my God, something happened, tell me everything." Juliana collapsed next to her. "I met someone. Someone, like a someone, his name is Grant. He was sitting next to me at dinner, we talked all night, and Sarah, he's—" She paused. "How did you casually mention this?" "He's kind of a millionaire." Sarah's book hit the floor. "Excuse me." "Correction. He's worth $300 million. I'm sorry, what?" Juliana told her everything, from the quiet man in the loosened tie to the revelation of his identity to Chinese food at Golden Dragon. Sarah listened with increasingly wide eyes. "Let me get this straight," Sarah said when she finished. "Grant Owens, the Grant Owens, took you for Chinese food in his Honda. It's a very reliable car, apparently. Julie, do you understand what you just landed?" "I didn't land anything. We just connected." "He's actually really normal when you talk to him." Sarah shook her head, grinning. "Only you could go to a fancy gala and end up with a multimillionaire who drives a Honda and eats lo mein. When are you seeing him again?" "Tomorrow at 2. What are you wearing?" Juliana hadn't thought that far ahead. Jeans." "No, absolutely not. We're going through your closet right now." They spent the next hour pulling out clothes and debating options before settling on dark jeans and a soft blue sweater that Sarah insisted brought out Juliana's eyes. Then Juliana fell into bed, exhausted and exhilarated, replaying every moment of the evening. She woke to sunlight streaming through her window and a text message. "Grant, morning. Still good for 2, Juliana, definitely." "Where are we going, Grant? It's a surprise. Dress casual." She spent the morning grading papers in a distracted haze, checking the clock every 10 minutes. When 2 o'clock finally arrived, she was waiting outside when Grant pulled up. He traded his tuxedo for jeans and a dark Henley that made him look even more attractive somehow. "Hey," he said, opening the passenger door for her. "Hey yourself. Are you going to tell me where we're going and ruin the surprise?" He pulled into traffic. "How were the papers?" "Mostly good. One of my students wrote that his favorite thing about spring is that his dog likes to eat the flowers and then throw them up on the carpet." Grant laughed. "Honest, at least." They drove out of the city, heading into the suburbs. Juliana watched the buildings give way to residential neighborhoods, and then to more open spaces. Grant navigated like he'd made this drive before, eventually turning onto a long driveway that led to a large warehouse building. "Where are we?" Juliana asked. "My shop. I wanted to show you something." Inside, the warehouse was split between functional space and what was clearly a personal workshop. Tools hung on pegboards. A classic Mustang in deep blue sat elevated on a lift. Parts were organized neatly on shelves. "This is where you restore your car?" Juliana asked, walking around the Mustang. It was beautiful, all curves and chrome. "This is where I remember why I love what I do," Grant said. He ran a hand along the car's fender. "When business gets complicated, when it's all about profit margins and stockholder meetings, I come here. Work with my hands, fix something tangible, it's gorgeous." She's a 1967 fastback. Found her rusting in a barn 5 years ago, been slowly bringing her back to life. He looked at Juliana. "Wanna help?" "Help, Grant, I don't know anything about cars." "I'll teach you, come here." For the next 2 hours, Grant walked her through what he was working on, explaining the engine parts with infectious enthusiasm. He put a wrench in her hand and guided her through loosening a bolt, his body close behind hers, his breath warm against her ear. When she successfully removed a part, he praised her like she'd solved a complicated equation. "You're a natural," he said. "I'm following directions from an expert. Most people get frustrated or bored. You're actually engaged with this." Juliana met his eyes. "Because you care about it." "That makes it interesting. Something shifted in his expression. He set down the tool he was holding and stepped closer. "Julie, I need to tell you something." Her heart jumped. "Okay. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since last night. About the way you talk about your students, about how you didn't care who I was, about how you laugh at my terrible jokes." He took her hand. "I know we just met, and this is probably too fast, but I want to see where this goes, if you're willing." Juliana felt like her chest might burst. "I want that too. I've been thinking about you all morning. Actually, I barely graded anything because I kept daydreaming about Chinese food and mashed potato jokes." Grant smiled, really smiled, and it transformed his entire face. Then he cupped her cheek and kissed her, soft and questioning. Juliana kissed him back, her hands finding his shoulders, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. When they broke apart, they were both breathing harder. That was. Juliana started. "Yeah," Grant agreed. They spent the rest of the afternoon in the workshop, talking and laughing and stealing kisses between car parts. Grant told her about his vision for the company, how he wanted to innovate sustainable manufacturing. She told him about her dreams of starting a literacy outreach program. They discovered they both loved old movies, terrible puns, and hiking, even though neither of them did it as often as they wanted. When evening came, Grant suggested they grab pizza, and they ended up at a local place with checkered tablecloths and a jukebox in the corner. Over pepperoni slices, Juliana asked the question that had been nagging at her. "Are you worried about people finding out? About us, I mean. I looked up more about you today. You're kind of famous in business circles." Grant wiped his hands on a napkin. "I'm not ashamed of you if that's what you're asking. No, I just mean, your world and my world are really different. Won't people have opinions? People always have opinions. My ex taught me that relationships in the spotlight are hard. But I'm not going to hide how I feel because of other people." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "If you're worried about being with someone who has money, I'm not," Juliana interrupted. "Or I am, but not the way you think. I'm worried about losing myself in it. My life is pretty simple. I have a one-bedroom apartment I share with my best friend. I budget carefully. I pack my lunch for work. Your life is private planes and charity galas. I don't have a private plane. And I hate galas, remember?" Grant squeezed her hand. "Julie, money is just a tool. It doesn't change who I am or who you are. We like the same things. Chinese food, bad jokes, helping kids, that's what matters. You make it sound simple. Because it is. Either we like each other enough to figure this out or we don't. Everything else is just noise." Juliana looked at their joined hands, his calloused fingers wrapped around hers. He was right. The connection between them was real, whether he had $300 or 300 million. "Okay," she said. "Let's figure it out." Over the next few weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Grant would pick her up after work, and they'd explore the city together. Hole-in-the-wall restaurants, bookstores, art galleries. He took her to a minor league baseball game where they ate hot dogs and yelled themselves hoarse. She dragged him to a poetry reading at a coffee shop where he actually enjoyed the performances. They went hiking on a Sunday, getting lost on the trail and having to navigate back using Grant's phone, laughing the whole way. Juliana introduced him to Sarah, who interrogated him thoroughly before declaring him surprisingly normal for a millionaire. Grant told her about his family, and when his mother visited from out of town, he brought Juliana to dinner. Patricia Owens was a warm woman with Grant's gray eyes who hugged Juliana immediately and spent the evening sharing embarrassing childhood stories. "He used to take apart all my kitchen appliances," Patricia said over dessert. "I'd come home and find the toaster in pieces on the floor. Drove me crazy, but he always put them back together better than before." Grant groaned. "Mom, You don't need to tell her everything. I like everything, Juliana said, grinning at him. The publicity Grant had warned her about started slowly. A photo of them at the baseball game ended up on a local business blog with the caption, "Manufacturing Mogul's Mystery Woman." Then, a more prominent picture from a restaurant opening they'd attended. Juliana's phone lit up with calls from friends she hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly interested in her life. "Is it always like this?" she asked Grant one evening. They were at his house, a surprisingly modest 3-bedroom ranch in a quiet neighborhood, cooking dinner together. "It gets worse before it gets better." Grant was chopping vegetables, his movements efficient. "Once they realize you're not going to give interviews or spill secrets, they'll lose interest." "What secrets would I spill?" "That you're obsessed with getting the perfect crust on homemade pizza." "That's classified information." He kissed her temple as he passed behind her. "How's the sauce?" Juliana stirred the pot on the stove. "Needs more basil." They'd been together 2 months and it felt like 2 years in the best way. Comfortable, easy. Grant had a key to her apartment, and she had the code to his workshop. He'd come to her classroom twice now, once to help her set up the new library funded by his auction donation, and once to read to the kids. Watching him sit cross-legged on the carpet with a picture book, second graders crowded around, had done something to Juliana's heart. "Mr. Grant, are you Miss Julie's boyfriend?" Marcus had asked with the bluntness of a 7-year-old. Grant had glanced at Juliana, a question in his eyes. She'd nodded, warmth flooding through her. "Yes," Grant had told Marcus. "I'm very lucky." Now, standing in his kitchen while pasta boiled and sauce simmered, Juliana felt that same warmth. She watched Grant move around the space, completely at home. He'd told her once that he'd bought this house because it reminded him of the home he'd wanted as a kid. Nothing ostentatious, just comfortable. "What are you thinking about?" Grant asked, catching her staring. "How I didn't expect any of this." "Any of what?" "You, us, this feeling." Juliana set down the spoon she was holding. "Grant, I'm falling in love with you." She hadn't meant to say it. The words just slipped out honest and raw. Grant went very still, the knife in his hand pausing mid-chop. For a horrible moment, Juliana thought she'd miscalculated, moved too fast. Then he set down the knife and crossed to her in 2 strides, cupping her face in both hands. "Julie, I'm already in love with you. I have been for weeks. I was just waiting for the right time to tell you." He kissed her, deep and sure, and Juliana felt it everywhere. When they broke apart, she was breathless. "The pasta's going to overcook," she whispered. "I don't care." They kissed again, and the pasta did overcook, and they laughed about it while making grilled cheese sandwiches instead. Later, curled together on his couch watching an old movie neither of them paid attention to, Grant traced patterns on her arm. "I want you to meet my brothers," he said. "They're coming to town next weekend for a company thing. Dinner, nothing fancy." "I'd love that." "They're going to embarrass me. Fair warning." "Good. I need more stories." Grant's brothers, Gabriel and Jeffrey, were as down-to-earth as their older brother. Over dinner at an Italian place, they regaled Juliana with stories of growing up with Grant, his obsession with fixing things, his stubborn determination to succeed. "He used to work 3 jobs," Gabriel, the middle brother, said. "He was a teacher himself, teaching high school science. Saving every penny for that first business loan." Jeffrey, the youngest, a physical therapist, nodded. "We thought he was crazy, but Grant doesn't do anything halfway." "That's true," Grant admitted, his arm around Juliana's shoulders. "When I commit to something, I'm all in." He looked at her as he said it, and Juliana understood. He wasn't just talking about business. He was all in with her too. The months blurred together in the best way. Juliana's classroom thrived with the new library. She started the literacy outreach program she'd dreamed of, and Grant quietly funded it through his foundation. When she found out, she'd been torn between gratitude and frustration. "You can't just throw money at everything I mention," she'd said. "I'm not throwing money. I'm investing in good work. You'd be doing this regardless. I'm just making it easier. Grant, Julie, I have more money than I'll ever spend. Let me use it for things that matter. You matter. Those kids matter." She'd kissed him instead of arguing, because how could she fight with someone who wanted to make the world better? When summer came, Grant took a week off work and they drove up the coast. No itinerary, just a car and open road. They stayed in small bed and breakfasts, hiked along cliffs, ate seafood at beach shacks. One evening, watching the sunset over the ocean, Grant pulled her close. "I've never been this happy," he said quietly. "I didn't know I could be. Me neither. Julie, I know it's only been 6 months, but I need you to know something." He turned her to face him. "You're it for me, the person I want to come home to, the one I want to share everything with. I'm not asking anything right now, I just need you to know that this isn't temporary for me." Tears pricked Juliana's eyes. "It's not temporary for me either. You're stuck with me, Grant Owens. Best news I've heard all day." They returned to the city tanned and relaxed, ready to face whatever came next. What came was increased media attention. A business magazine wanted to profile Grant, and they wanted to include information about his personal life. He turned them down flat. "I'm not letting them use you for a story," he told Juliana. "My business is public. My life with you isn't." But the attention kept coming. Photographers outside his house, her apartment. Someone tried to interview her students' parents about her relationship with a millionaire. The school principal called her in, concerned about the disruption. "I'm not asking you to end your relationship," Principal Davidson said carefully. "But perhaps more discretion. The school has an image to maintain." Juliana had been furious. She'd called Grant, venting about the unfairness of being judged for who she loved. He'd listened quietly, then said something that surprised her. "We could make it official." "What?" "Put out a statement through my company PR, confirm the relationship, provide basic information, ask for privacy. Sometimes the best way to kill speculation is to give them the boring truth." They'd crafted a simple statement together. Grant Owens was in a committed relationship with Juliana Grace, an elementary school teacher. They valued their privacy and appreciated respect for it. No further comments would be provided. The statement worked. The initial flurry of interest died down when it became clear there was no scandal, no drama. Just two people who'd found each other and were building something real. A year after the gala, Grant took Juliana back to Golden Dragon. They sat in the same booth, ate the same dishes. Mrs. Chen fussed over them, bringing extra spring rolls. "So," Grant said, setting down his chopsticks, "I've been thinking." "Dangerous," Juliana teased. "I'm serious." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "This year has been the best of my life. You've made me remember what matters. Not the business, not the money, just being with someone who sees me. Grant, I love you, you know that." "I do." He slid out of the booth and, to Juliana's shock, knelt beside the table. "Which is why I'm asking if you'll marry me." He pulled out a ring, simple and elegant, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. "I know your favorite color is blue, and I know you don't want anything flashy. And I know this is a Chinese restaurant and maybe not the most romantic place, but this is where I really fell for you. Where I saw that my life could be more than work and loneliness." Juliana's hands were shaking. "You're proposing, actually proposing, actually proposing. Will you marry me, Julie?" "Yes." The word burst out of her, joyful and sure. "Yes, absolutely yes." Grant slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her, and Mrs. Chen started crying from the kitchen doorway. The elderly couple who'd been eating in the corner started clapping. It was perfect and ridiculous and exactly right. They married 6 months later in a small ceremony. Patricia cried. Sarah was maid of honor. Grant's brothers stood up with him, making jokes during the toasts that had everyone laughing. They'd chosen a small venue, invited only people who genuinely mattered, and kept the whole thing off social media. For their honeymoon, Grant surprised Juliana with a trip to a small island where they could be completely anonymous. 2 weeks of beach and books and each other, no phones or internet or outside world. "How did you find this place?" Juliana asked, lying on the sand beside him. "Research. I wanted somewhere we could just be us." "I love being us." "Me too." They returned to their lives, but everything felt different, better. Juliana moved into Grant's house, and they began the work of blending their lives. She kept teaching, refusing his offers to quit and run the Literacy Foundation full-time. "I need the classroom," she explained. "Those kids ground me, remind me what I'm working for." Grant understood. He'd never ask her to give up something she loved. 2 years into their marriage, Juliana came home from school to find Grant in the garage working on a different car. This one was smaller, a vintage station wagon. "What's this?" she asked. "A project." He straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "I was thinking if we're going to have kids someday, we need a good family car." Juliana's breath caught. They talked about children abstractly, someday maybe conversations. But this was concrete. A car. A family car. "Are you saying you want to start trying?" Grant crossed to her, pulling her close. "I'm saying I want everything with you. The whole messy, beautiful future. Kids, family dinners, teaching them to fix engines and love reading. All of it." "I want that too," Juliana whispered. 8 months later, they found out they were pregnant. Grant cried when she told him, actual tears streaming down his face. He called his mother immediately, then his brothers, his voice thick with emotion. Juliana called Sarah, who screamed so loud she probably woke the neighbors. The pregnancy was mostly smooth. Juliana taught until her 7th month, when carrying second graders' energy became too exhausting. Grant worked from home more, making sure she was comfortable. They painted the nursery together, debating colors and themes until they settled on a soft yellow with white clouds. When Juliana went into labor on a Tuesday morning, Grant drove her to the hospital with the careful precision of someone terrified of breaking his most precious cargo. 15 hours later, they welcomed their daughter, Emily Patricia Owens, 7 pounds and 5 ounces of perfection. Grant held her with trembling hands, staring at her tiny face like he'd never seen anything more miraculous. "She's so small," he whispered. "She's perfect," Juliana said, exhausted and elated. They brought Emily home to a house overflowing with love. Patricia came to stay for 2 weeks, helping with night feedings and teaching them the things first-time parents needed to know. Gabriel and Jeffrey visited, bringing gifts and taking hundreds of photos. Sarah became the world's most devoted honorary aunt. Watching Grant with their daughter, Juliana fell in love with him all over again. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor during crying jags at 3 in the morning, sang off key lullabies that somehow worked. He rearranged his work schedule to be home more, bringing Emily to the office sometimes, where she became the unofficial mascot of Owens Industrial Solutions. On Emily's first birthday, they threw a party in their backyard. Nothing fancy, just family and close friends, a cake shaped like a book because their daughter already loved story time. Juliana watched Grant chase his daughter around the grass, Emily's delighted giggles floating on the air, and felt overwhelmed by gratitude. Sarah sidled up next to her. "Who would have thought? A charity gala and a chance seating assignment." "Best seat I ever had," Juliana said, He's good for you. You're good for him. We're good for each other. That night, after Emily was asleep and the house was quiet, Grant and Juliana sat on their back porch, watching fireflies blink in the darkness. "Remember when you thought I was just some uncomfortable guy in a tux?" Grant asked, pulling her against his side. "Remember when you bought $50,000 worth of books and I nearly passed out? Best impulse purchase I ever made. I thought you were weird for driving a Honda. You were weird for being surprised." They laughed, the sound comfortable and familiar. 3 years since that gala, and sometimes it felt like they'd known each other forever. Other times, Juliana would look at him and be struck by the wonder of it all, that they'd found each other in a ballroom full of strangers, that a random seating assignment had changed everything. "What are you thinking?" Grant asked, reading her expression. "That I'm really glad I helped organize that literacy auction. Me too." He kissed her temple. "Though I would have found you eventually." "Oh yeah, how do you figure?" "Because you're exactly who I needed." The universe would have figured it out somehow. Juliana didn't believe in fate or destiny, but she believed in this. In them. In the life they'd built from Chinese takeout and car parts and a decision to see where things could go. "I love you," she said. "I love you too." Inside, Emily stirred, her soft cries coming through the baby monitor. Grant started to get up, but Juliana stopped him. "I'll get her. You did the last 2 wake-ups." She went inside, lifted their daughter from her crib, and brought her back outside where Grant waited. Together they rocked Emily under the stars, a family built from chance and choice and love. 2 years later, they welcomed their son, James Gabriel Owens. Their family was complete. Grant scaled back his hours even more, promoting trusted colleagues to leadership positions so he could focus on what mattered most. Juliana returned to teaching part-time, loving the balance between her classroom and her children. They took family trips in the restored station wagon. Beach vacations where Emily and James collected shells and Grant built elaborate sandcastles. Visits to Patricia, who spoiled her grandchildren shamelessly. Quiet evenings at home where they read stories and played board games and savored the ordinary magic of their lives. On their 5th anniversary, Grant took Juliana back to the hotel where the gala had been held. They had dinner in the same ballroom, at a private table he'd arranged. "I wanted to recreate our first night," he said. "But this time, I'm telling you from the start that I'm Grant Owens, CEO, Millionaire, and completely in love with you. And I'm Juliana Owens, teacher, mother, and even more in love with you than I was then, which I didn't think was possible. We've had a good run, the best run. And we're just getting started." Grant raised his glass. "To charity galas and random seating. To quiet men who turn out to be extraordinary." They clinked glasses and drank, and later they danced to the same band that had played 5 years ago. Juliana rested her head against Grant's shoulder, remembering the nervous woman in a borrowed dress who'd had no idea what the evening would bring. She'd been looking for a seat at a table. She'd found a home in a person. Years continued to unfold. Emily started school, where she inherited her mother's love of reading and her father's curiosity about how things worked. James was quieter, content to build elaborate structures with blocks and listen to stories. Grant's business continued to thrive, but he was careful to keep it from consuming his life. The work mattered, but his family mattered more. Juliana became principal of Riverside Elementary, a position where she could implement the literacy programs she'd always dreamed of. Grant funded a new wing for the school library, insisting it be named after Mrs. Chen, Juliana's 2nd-grade teacher who'd inspired everything. On weekends, they still went to Golden Dragon, now with 2 kids in tow. Mrs. Chen continued to bring too much food and offer unsolicited but appreciated advice. The restaurant had become a touchstone, a reminder of where they'd chosen each other when they barely knew what they were choosing. When Emily was 10 and James was 8, they asked their parents how they'd met. Grant and Juliana exchanged glances across the dinner table. "At a fancy party," Juliana said. "Dad was sitting next to Mom," Grant added. "She didn't know who I was." "But you liked each other anyway?" Emily asked. "We did. Your mom made me laugh. She was the first person in a long time who saw me as just Grant, not as someone with money or a company. And your dad listened when I talked about teaching, really listened like it mattered." "It did matter," Grant said softly. "You mattered." James scrunched his nose. "That's mushy." "It is mushy," Juliana agreed, grinning. "Love is mushy." Later, after the kids were in bed, Grant found Juliana in their room looking at photos from that first year. The gala picture where they were leaving together, her in his jacket. The shot from Golden Dragon that misses. Chen had insisted on taking. Their wedding day, surrounded by everyone they loved. "Nostalgic?" he asked. "A little. It's hard to believe that was 11 years ago. Best 11 years of my life, mine too." Grant wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Think we'll still be eating Chinese takeout when we're 70? Absolutely. Mrs. Chen will probably still be telling us we're too skinny." They laughed, the sound as comfortable as breathing. And that was it, really. The secret to their happiness. They'd found comfort in each other, built a life on friendship and respect and genuine love. The money that had seemed so significant that first night had become irrelevant. What mattered was this: coming home to each other, raising their children, building something that would last. Years later, when Emily graduated high school and announced she wanted to study education, becoming a teacher like her mother, Juliana cried. When James was accepted to an engineering program, planning to learn manufacturing from the ground up like his father, Grant beamed with pride. They'd raised good humans, people who understood that success wasn't measured in money but in impact, in kindness, in showing up for others. On their 25th anniversary, their children threw them a surprise party. All their friends and family gathered, spanning decades of their life together. Patricia, now in her 80s but still sharp as ever, gave a toast. 25 years ago, I met a young woman who made my son smile in a way I'd never seen before. She didn't care that he was successful. She cared that he was kind, that he listened, that he showed up. Patricia's eyes were bright with tears. "Thank you, Juliana, for loving my boy, for building this beautiful family, for showing all of us what real love looks like." Grant stood, pulling Juliana up with him. "My turn." 26 years ago, I walked into a charity gala because I had to, not because I wanted to. I sat down next to a woman in a green dress who looked as uncomfortable as I felt. She told me about her students and made me laugh about mashed potatoes, and I knew. Right then, I knew she was different. Special, mine. He turned to Juliana, taking both her hands. "You've given me everything. A home that feels safe. Children who amaze me every day. A reason to care about more than just work. Julie, you're the best thing that ever happened to me." Here's to 25 more years, and then 25 after that. Juliana couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She just kissed him, surrounded by everyone they loved, grateful beyond words for a charity gala and a seating assignment and a quiet man who'd turned out to be exactly what she needed. The party continued around them, but for a moment, it was just the two of them. Just Grant and Juliana, the way it had been that first night at Golden Dragon. Two people who'd taken a chance on something uncertain and built it into something extraordinary. Their love story hadn't been perfect. They'd had arguments about work-life balance and parenting styles, and